This is Jed Distler, and welcome to the Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. You can subscribe to this podcast through my Substack page by clicking on the link in the episode description. Paid subscribers get bonuses such as Piano Maven Zoom meetings, where we can share listening experiences and meet special guests. So please consider subscribing to help us reach out further into the piano community and to keep this podcast in production. So you get all the goodies with a paid subscription, but if you take out a free subscription, that's okay too. You'll still get to hear the podcasts, but all of the cool little extras, you gotta shell out something. But please consider doing so. That would help us so much. So now we are more or less at the halfway point of a mini-series that I started to launch our second season of the Piano Maven. And in this mini-series, I recommend recordings for each one of the 32 Beethoven sonatas. I recommend 2 recordings for each sonata, one historic or archival recording, and one modern recording from the stereo and digital eras. And my goal is not to repeat a pianist over this process, so that in the end we will have discussed 32 sonatas and 64 pianists. And I should reiterate that I am not necessarily saying that all of these are my favorite recordings of these pieces, although in some cases they are, but that all of the performances that I recommend have great distinction. At least I hope they do. I feel they do. And I don't think there are any weak links in the performances I'm recommending. I'd like to think that. Maybe you will agree or disagree, but that's the way it is. So we arrive at Sonata number 15 in D major, opus 28. This sonata probably got its nickname, the Pastoral, because of the opening fifth beginning of the finale. It's kind of a drone that evokes the sound image of a shepherd pipe, I guess. And also that genial D natural pedal point in the bass at the beginning of the first movement, I think has a pastoral connotation. In my search for a historic or an archival recording with a pianist that I had not yet discussed, nor a pianist whom I plan to recommend in later sonatas, I did find a really nice live performance with the pianist Wilhelm Backhaus, and he's on remarkably good form in this live performance, considering that it's from 1969, only 3 months before his death. Backhaus was famous for his Beethoven, and he recorded 2 complete Beethoven sonata cycles for Decca, one in mono and one in stereo. Actually, he never got around to remaking the Hammerklavier sonata in stereo. I often find Backhaus to be inspired and communicative, but sometimes he's cavalier in terms of detail, and his slow movements, to my taste, tend to be kind of perfunctory. Anyway, although I admire how Backhaus played the Pastoral sonata in his studio stereo remake, giving it broad brushstrokes and with a beautiful full-bodied sound, he also brings these same virtues to the 1969 live performance that appeared on the Audit label. But I think he does so even more impetuously and with a lot more spontaneity, especially in the finale, even though I have to admit he struggles a bit here and there. It doesn't really matter because I think the performance is so much in the moment. And even his old-fashioned breaking of hands in the first movement, for some reason it bothers me less in this live performance. I don't know why. Maybe I was just getting into the performance, but he really does move things along in this performance, and he does sound younger than his 84 years, that's for sure. Now, my modern recommendation for a stereo digital recording of Opus 28 may well surprise you, because this is not a recording from a pianist that you would normally associate with Beethoven, even though she did record the 5 concertos as a cycle. I'm talking about Alicia de la Rocha. Her recording for RCA of the Opus 28 sonata is really transparent and heartfelt and totally stylish from top to bottom. Her phrasing of the andante evokes the image of a wind ensemble with the détaché bass notes sounding very much like a perky bassoon, and the legato right hand representing maybe a clarinet or horn, maybe. I also love how she totally nails those treacherous final measures in the 4th movement. This is one of the hardest passages that Beethoven ever wrote, and I'm curious that people don't really talk about how challenging it is. These pages are, this section, this coda, is not easy to play. But Alicia de la Rocha just sails through it. Do you hear the siren in the back? Anyway, Alicia de la Rocha's recording of the Beethoven Pastoral Sonata was recorded in 1992, and originally it filled out a disc containing her performance of Beethoven's first concerto, with Michael Tilson Thomas conducting. And this performance was linked to a television series that was called Concerto with an exclamation point. And the series was hosted by Dudley Moore, and you had concertos featuring different instruments. And, by the way, I think this was Alicia de la Rocha's only Beethoven sonata recording on commercial discs, so far as I know. So, in that regard, I'm very happy to recommend it, because not only is it an excellent version of Opus 28, but it allows us to represent one of the greatest pianists of her time in our roster. So, I'm very happy to do that. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings, and we will continue with Beethoven's Opus 31, number 1 sonata next time.